Are you crazy?
Where's your Desert Eagle? Pew, pew, pew.
Yeah, where are they?
Well, unfortunately, I can't have one in Colombia, but I wish I had one.
Just these guys.
Maybe that's something that we
these
can
Desert Eagles,
talk
these
about.
ones.
Oh, those Desert Eagles.
Yes, those are
I got two.
I got two big grenades.
Very
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think we can talk about a little bit of that on this show, this episode rather, because one of the things that I've been, I wouldn't say fascinated by, but just always interested in was the topic of survivalism. I only realized it was called survivalism when we did the investigation for this episode, because up until then I'd only ever known it as prepping.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always been interesting to me, prepping and survivalism, how to get yourself into a position where you feel like you've got everything in place that you would need if there was going to be some kind of catastrophic event, whether it's a local event or whether it's, more of a national emergency or even a global event, right? So just to kind of put this episode into context, I think everything that's been happening over the last couple of years and apparently getting much, much more frequent in its intensity, all this craziness we keep hearing about on the news, whether it's threats of World War III or whether it's a disastrous toxic spill in Ohio, which happened recently, as everyone probably already knows, or whether it's a pandemic outbreak of the H5N1 bird flu, which is apparently going to happen. We can cover that on the episode too. There's so many things that could go wrong. And I think it really does just pay to be prepared. I don't know what you guys think about that, but what are your thoughts about prep and survivalism? What's your experience with it as well?
Is there like a proper term for it? Like I've heard survivalism in the States, we call it prepping. Is there another word that we should be using, or is there like just a large vocabulary for, describing this kind of stuff, prepping for whether it's a disaster or the apocalypse or a pandemic? It's a very broad category, isn't it?
I think the term would be disaster preparedness. That's probably the one that I've heard that's the most official. But, anything, right? Any kind of shit that could happen that would go wrong. It's I think it's all covered by that. I don't think there's anything that kind of is specifically for natural disasters or specifically for, I guess hazmat would be one of those things that maybe would be more specific in the event of like a pandemic or a nuclear war. Maybe there's specific terminology for that, but survivalism is what I understand it to be, kind of all encompassing for this prep that we're talking about today. So hopefully people are kind of like on the same pages already when it comes to that. What about you, Hillary?
Preparedness is how I've always heard it, but yes, disaster preparedness, I guess survivalism is something that carries with it so much more weight in terms of like doomsday thinking, right? But the first time I actually ever prepared, I called it a go bag. Like, I think that's what we've always called them, right? Like go bags in case of an earthquake, make sure you have water. So what I did was I have in it, so I have this notebook that, have you heard of the Rocket notebooks? This is not sponsored by Rocket Notebooks.
Sponsored by Rocket.
What is that? I wish it was sponsored by Rocket.
It's really cool. It's these notebooks. I think you're talking about the same one. I have one that are connected to like an app or whatever, so that when you like write in the notebook and then you scan the notebook, it like automatically uploads it to like a Dropbox or something. It's really cool.
And you can like microwave it. If you put it in the microwave, like it just cleans it out or something like that. But it's waterproof. You don't have to worry about it dissolving in water. Like if you somehow were in Florida and you had to like jump in the Everglades, I don't know why I thought of that specifically, but so I had that. I have bottles of water in there. I have Ziploc bags. I feel like Ziploc bags will be your best friend in terms of preparedness, just to keep everything dry. So I have like underwear, clothes, a set of clothes for my son, for myself, for my husband. So I got these ready and kind of stashed them away. The funny thing is 2 years go by and I realize my son won't fit in these clothes anymore because he's grown so much. So I've had to, sort of refresh the stock that I had in there, but I do have it looks like a duffel bag. It's by Cotopaxi, which, not to go off tangent, is a Utah-based brand, kind of like Patagonia or Columbia, but they provide jobs for, like the poor neighborhoods and communities in the Philippines. So my friend owns that, and not a single bag. No two bags are identical. They're all different. So I have that one there so that if anything happened, I just grab the bag, grab my kid, go. But that's as far as my preparedness goes. So I'm pretty excited to talk about this topic today.
Yeah, we used to call it Bugout Bags.
Yeah.
Right? Go bags, Bugout Bags.
Yeah, I've never actually until recently gotten to the point where I've decided to have a bag like that. And the funny thing is, we've all met someone in our life who is all prepared. Like that's all they really kind of talk about, is being prepared. And they seem a bit crazy because maybe before 2019, prep was just one of those kind of fringe things that a lot of conspiracy theorists would do, for example, just because they were worried that there was going to be some huge event, and everyone else thought they were just nuts because how could that possibly be? Now, you look at them and you think to yourself, at least I do, when I remember a guy that I met here in Medellin from Canada. And Brandon, I wanted to introduce you to him, but then he became really busy and I just can't get a hold of him anymore. But this guy, his name is Greg. He really hammered home the need for having that foresight and being prepared, not just physically, like with the supplies and the weapons and the whatever it is, but also mentally and emotionally prepared for what could possibly happen, especially after we saw what the COVID pandemic brought, lockdowns. There were shortages of supplies. There was violence and looting. I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened that we would never have imagined would have happened. And now it's happened. And so this all has so much more merit to it. This episode was not an accident. We didn't kind of come up with this idea because it was just one of those things on the list. It was like, oh, we could cover anything in the news right now. There's so much stuff happening, right? We're not kind of like lost for content, but I think covering prep and survivalism is becoming more important because people are wondering, well, what do we do if something like that happens in our area? What happens if there's a toxic spill? Or what happens if, God forbid, we all end up going to war with Russia and China? And maybe we can answer some of those questions on the episode today. But like I said, there's a whole bunch of reasons. And I mean, I guess I got a list of some here, but outside of, those natural disasters and the global wars, there's things like markets and financial crashes. We've seen them before, but I think now, and this is mirrored also in the people that, I follow, like people I respect, like Robert Kiyosaki or Mark Moss, or any number of the voices in the financial field who are talking about potential collapses with currencies. And I don't really know how that would look, but it's something that could have a massive impact on people's lives to the point where, just everyday life would be destroyed. It would look so different. And I don't know if people really know what that means or how to prepare for it. So that's another one. And then there are the pandemics. So this new surge of global infections, viruses like COVID or H5N1, which I have a video actually of Tedros, the guy who is in charge, or not in charge, but let's just say he's the spokesperson for the World Health Organization. He recently explained in a conference that there has been a recent uptick in H5N1 detected in a lot of different species of animals, and that we need to be prepared for potentially human transmission and a global outbreak. Check this out, and then let's figure out what that actually means for us.
Over the past few weeks, There have been several reports of mammals, including minks, otters, foxes, and sea lions, having been infected with H5N1 avian influenza. We have only seen rare and non-sustained transmission of H5N1 to and between humans. But we cannot assume that will remain the case. WHO is also continuing to engage with manufacturers to make sure that, if needed, supplies of vaccines and antivirals would be available for global use.
I don't know if you heard that because it was pretty low, so maybe it was just a recording at the time. But he said a couple of things there that are really important. He said that, well, we need to be prepared for a global outbreak, and that if one did happen, they would want to be in a position where they could distribute treatment and vaccines to the global population. And this just sounds to me like a repeat of COVID. And I don't know, because obviously we can't make those kinds of judgments on this show, but I don't know, right, whether this is completely organic or whether this, how do they know that these things are going to happen? That's my question.
I mean, there's a lot out there where people are saying that, and like you said, we are not making any judgments or making any claims on the show. We are merely sharing what's already out there. Some people have shared videos where it's been said that, oh, there's another pandemic coming, which leads many to believe that this is sort of pre-planned, and they're just conditioning people to sort of be ready for another disaster. I think that the past 3 years have created a reaction among people that when they hear the V word, they immediately feel one of two things. They feel one way or another about it, and they're either immediately going to rush and comply, or they're also going to be like, well, I don't know, very hesitant about it. So it is a curious thing how people, and you've got shows like The Last of Us, which, you know, is based off of a video game that also plays into our psyche. So how are people preparing for possible disaster? All these things have an influence on us. So all those things are worth considering.
Yeah, you mentioned The Last of Us. It's actually a really good TV show, by the way. Really enjoyed the video game too, at least in my opinion. But I think it's cool in some ways to see that kind of stuff, to see the different types of attack vectors on society and the things that could lead to a disaster. And then, you know, the reality of that too. Like, it's not that far-fetched to say like a fungus of some kind could, you know, infect us at some point and cause us to act a certain way, or could, you know, have a negatively profound effect on society, just the same way a virus could, or a bacteria. So I like shows like that. I think it's good to open up our minds a little bit. But what's very concerning, even with like H5N1, is the fact that they know it's something that could cause a major pandemic, or that it even has been around and they've known about it for half a decade, in some instances over a decade, and it hasn't happened, but they haven't prepared for that. Like, they haven't prepared an actual vaccine that's regulated in case that scenario were to occur. And now that we've had COVID, I think they should have the initiatives where they say what's most likely to cause a breakout in certain regions or even globally, and how can they take steps now to create a vaccine. So I think they, in some ways, are either very cheap and don't want to put the money and resources towards it, or they want to let these things happen. And, you know, that's where the conspiracy side comes in. But why aren't they preparing for this stuff? They've known about COVID for a very long time. They could have prepared better for it. And they waited for everyone to get sick, and then 6-8 months later crank out a vaccine. So there's some weird things associated with that.
Yeah, I think that is the conspiracy right there, that they did have something already prepared. I mean, we've got the CEO of Moderna on a panel, I think at the WEF 27, was it the Web 27, talking about, or boasting rather, about how they were preparing for, the COVID pandemic back in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got your timelines in order, that's very early. That's earlier than most people knew about it. And I mean, I don't know what that means, but it's kind of suspicious. So regardless of whether, I guess, these things are planned or whether they're not planned, it makes sense to treat this news as if something would happen, because they've been talking about cyber attacks at the World Economic Forum, and lo and behold, cyber attacks happened like a week later. So it's kind of some kind of weird synchronicity to the news that we hear and what happens in real life. On a very fundamental note, preparation for something like a pandemic that could affect one's health, you should really be thinking about your immune system. I mean, that's the first place that I would start if I knew that I could be contracting some kind of viral infection. Your body needs to be prepared and in a position to be able to fight whatever infection that is, whether it's novel or whether it's something that we've seen before. But these kinds of pathogens, as far as I understand, and maybe you guys understand a bit more because I am not an expert by any means, but these kinds of flu viruses kind of all operate in the same way. And your immune system is absolutely crucial to being able to fight them off. It's not a question of whether you just want to wait for treatment. Your body's the first line of defense. And that was something that was really neglected in the COVID pandemic and the way that the governments around the world dealt with it. We didn't really talk at all about strengthening the immune system. That was all independent information that you would find on podcasts or, newsletters from just independent organizations. So that was frustrating. And I think most people who maybe don't understand health and are so caught up with daily life, they really weren't given the tools that they needed. And in actual fact, a lot of people were forced to damage their immune systems, staying inside, not getting sun, not getting fresh air. We now know, looking back, that those were pretty bad policies for stemming or chopping off or flattening the curve, right? I think it actually had, in many cases, the opposite effect. So starting with your immune system, for me personally, when it comes to these kinds of disasters, let's say, is like the most important thing you could do. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only does it benefit you in terms of, staying healthy and strong from catching anything, but also it helps keep you alert in terms of tactical awareness, because not only are you trying to not die of a disease, but you're also trying to be aware, like what Brandon was talking about, how like Last of Us, right? Like, are you really afraid of the zombies, or are you more afraid of other human beings? I mean, that's
yeah, that's a good one.
Because even with Walking Dead, the series, right, way back those years ago, I'd always thought, like, yeah, I think I would be more afraid of other human beings who willfully would just be harmful towards the same human beings, instead of, hey, let's band together and survive against these zombies. It's like, that's awful. It just shows the innate inherent evil that is in human beings. And I think that is an even bigger threat, perhaps. But the immune system, and like, people don't really want to talk about this, because I think that in America, for example, we are probably the most heavily medicated population in the world. Just like, you got a headache, pop a pill. We've become so dependent on being prescribed something that we forget our body is a machine that knows how to heal itself if you feed it, give it the right things like sunshine and movement and good food, good nutritious food. So it is important to go back to basics, which we are going to need should a disaster occur. So that's a good point to make, but also just to build on, just to kind of go back on, you're talking about the bird flu, and the possible spread. I know the video you showed was saying that there could be a transmission from well, I came across this article just now. I was just looking it up, and I said there's no evidence yet, really, that the H5N1 is a threat to people. This is as far as the article is concerned. We could add this link later too. They're saying that it's because the virus binds to receptors in the upper airways of birds that are so different from the way mammals' airways are built. And so the risk is pretty low. And they're saying that in 2017, actually, China had a vaccine that they had a mandatory vaccination of poultry against the H7N9. But can you imagine how hard it is to like vaccinate birds?
Oh my God. I didn't even realize how much money people don't get, how much money pharmaceutical companies are actually making, because they only see the treatment that is available to them, perhaps, but not to all these hundreds of thousands of millions of birds, right? Potentially that would need to be vaccinated. And it just blows my mind how much money's in that industry. And a lot of stuff makes sense when you start to question, is there really a cure for cancer? Like, do they know what that would look like? I mean, have they found stuff that does? And I'm led to believe that there is, right? But that will never become mainstream knowledge, because as long as they're making so much money from these treatments, why would they shoot themselves in the foot? So, yeah, anyway.
It's all about profit. You'd be surprised what some of these pharmaceutical companies know and what they have up there on their belt in a lot of ways in terms of prescriptions, vaccines, inoculations, whatever it may be. Even if there is some kind of cure for cancer, there's actually a lot of studies and experiments that have been done with different types of techniques to eliminate cancer, and they've been like 100 over 100 effective. Like, but why isn't that at market? You know, it's a profit thing. Like, if no one else gets cancer, like if you come up with some kind of treatment that doesn't harm the actual patient and that could solve lung cancer, for example, then no one else is going to get lung cancer, and you lose that market. You can no longer treat them. Yep. And I personally know how expensive treating cancer is, and it's thousands and thousands of dollars, especially if you have it over a prolonged period of time, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, you know, you don't even get a positive result in the end. And that's all into their pocket. So if they were to find a cure for it, that it's not in their best interest. So why would they do it? So we could speculate on it. I think that it's possible they could have something, maybe, but we're never going to see it until they find another way, you know, to profit off of this industry. And that's what I hate about the pharmaceutical companies, is they profit off of your sickness, not off of your health.
Yeah. It's such a weird conflict of interest that happens, not even just in pharmaceuticals, but also, you know, in the medical industry itself, in the financial industry. It's kind of weird. Anyway, the world is the way it is. I mean, we just have to find ways to deal with it. Speaking of which, you know, the disaster that happened in Ohio, right? So I know we're bouncing around a bit here, but there are different types of disasters. There's different kind of ways that you can prepare. I don't think that people were ready for that kind of toxic spillage. I mean, I saw the videos and the plume of smoke that was coming out of that train wreckage, and it was just like apocalyptic. It looked like the scene from a movie, didn't it? Funny, because there was a movie a couple of months earlier that was featuring exactly the same accident. I just, honestly, Jesus, someone help me,
exact same accident in the same place, in the same state.
In the same place, in the same state. Looks the same when you put it side by side with the real event.
It's very weird.
Everything about it was just so creepy. We've seen a lot of symbolism lately. This isn't an episode about the Illuminati or anything like that, but I just can't help but wonder, what are the chances of something like that happening? What are the chances? And we've seen, like I said, we've seen a lot of symbolism in the music industry and in Hollywood popping up now. I mean, even from movies way before. It's just that people are becoming more aware that it exists. So who knows? Maybe that was a forewarning, and it was planned. But regardless, that area is contaminated. They're calling it the Chernobyl of the United States. And if you look at the map, the outlining areas are basically farmland. And the last I read, it was owned by family farms, not by corporate farms like Monsanto, etc., or the Carlyle Group. So who knows? I mean, it's adding up. This whole kind of, conspiracy really does have legs when you look at all the information available to you. It's also connected to a major waterway, which goes through multiple states. That water is contaminated. You can see it in the videos that have been published recently. It's all kind of sitting as a sediment at the bottom of the rivers. And as soon as you upset it, it floats to the top, and you can see the almost rainbow-like film that appears. And who would want to drink that water, right? So I don't know whether something like this would work to filter plastic toxins. I don't think it would. This is a life straw, and I found this on Amazon. It is really effective. You can actually use this to drink 1,000 liters of water, and you have a rechargeable or a refillable canister here where the filter can be, a new filter can be put in. You could literally take this to a river. You could, if you really wanted to, you could put it in your toilet and you could drink it from there. I haven't tried it, so please don't think that I've done that. But
I'd rather dehydrate than drink from the toilet. I'm sorry.
That should be a live episode of you doing a product test.
I'm just like,
sponsored by Life Straw.
Yeah,
drink out of your toilet. But it doesn't cost a lot of money. I think this costs under $30 for this. And you can take it with you. It's a squeezable bag rather than you can get the hard version. I'm selling this. I'm not selling it personally, but I'm selling the idea of having these kinds of tools because they may actually save your life. Like, imagine if in the event of a catastrophe where you can't drink the water from the faucet, you're going to have to go somewhere else for it. And where if the stores are shut, if they've been looted, which they probably would be in many scenarios like the ones we're talking about, where are you going to go to get water? And like you said, Brandon, the other day when we were discussing this, I think it's like 6 days before you basically die from hydration. 3 days rather. Jesus.
2 to 3 days. I think it's the most underrated resource that we take for granted that we just have at our disposal at all times. Like very rarely do you lose access to tap water or drinkable, potable water. But in a disaster like this, especially when your tap water, your potable drinking water is contaminated, it becomes a very big issue because you can only go 2-3 days without water before you die. You can go a month without food.
Yeah.
You can go indefinitely without electricity or gas. You cannot go 2-3 days without water. What does it say on the back of that? Like, what does it filter out? Because the problem in Ohio is the vinyl chloride converts into hydrogen. It converts into an acid, hydrochloric acid, when it comes in contact with water or even vapor in the air, which is the big concern.
So it's got stages. So there's 2 stages of the filtration technology. The first stage is that it removes 99.999999% of bacteria. So that's something you don't have to worry about anymore. E. coli, stuff like that. It removes 99.999, which is slightly less, percent of protozoa, which I don't even know what that is, but let's just say it's a bad thing. So it filters that out too. It removes 99.999% of microplastics. Not sure if that qualifies as a microplastic or if it's something totally different, but it filters out.
Hydrogen chloride is an acid.
Right.
So I don't know if it'll filter out an acid because that's the pH consistency of the water.
What's the name of the actual substance? It's vinyl something.
Vinyl
right?
chloride.
Vinyl chloride.
And one of its byproducts converts into hydrogen chloride or HCl.
We should really contact these people because maybe it would be good to publish whether this actually does work or not. It filters chlorine It filters bad tastes, odors, leads, heavy metals, and it's good for 100 liters. I said 1,000, so apologies, it's 100 liters. But 100 liters is 25 gallons, and that's a lot of water before you have to change the filter for this thing. So, I wish I knew more about what the poor people who are living in that area could do about their drinking water. I've seen people boiling water on the stove, and it's kind of bubbling.
I saw that video too.
Yeah, I've seen dead animals, dead birds, dead cows. I really think it's underreported, and I think it's absolutely atrocious that this is happening. And people need to be held accountable for it. But what those people might want to do is leave. Unfortunately, I don't think it makes sense to stick around in a hotspot area where there's a lot of toxic waste that's in the air and the water and the food. I think it makes sense to kind of say, okay, what's more important? My convenience, because it is convenient to stick around and hope the authorities will do something, or my health and my chances of survival out of this thing, and just kind of do everything you can to relocate. Sometimes that's the only thing you can do, is just get out of there.
It's difficult because they're not providing that kind of a resource to people. And, middle class to low income class people can't just pick up and go. That's their home. That's where, they invested all their money, sometimes over the course of their entire life. So for them to pick up and move their whole family is, a very difficult situation. On top of that, the government and the state aren't coming in and doing anything about it. They've barely covered it in the news. It took about a week and a half before they gave it any kind of media coverage, which is insane. They covered a Chinese weather balloon more than they covered this disaster.
UFOs.
They wouldn't even bring in potable water to the residents. They just said it's fine to drink. And even though people are boiling it on their stoves and it's bubbling and corrosing on the side of the pots. I've seen videos of people from towns outside of East Palestine drive in to offer them water because they can't drink anything. So I don't know where they would stay. I don't know where they would get a job. I don't know, what they're supposed to drink and eat. It's a massive displacement.
Well, I follow this account of someone who lives very close to where it happened. And what they do is they take in wildlife that are compromised or hurt. So a lot of the animals they take care of are foxes. And so many of these foxes have died just from the exposure in the air alone. And he was the guy who owned the place. He was trying to save as many of the animals that they were taking care of as he could, but they wouldn't even let him do that. So they were just immediately making them leave. But he did try. And I saw some comments in there saying that he was being threatened with an arrest for not complying. And he said, well, I'm trying to save these animals. And then another lady I saw also on social media, she was told it's okay now, it's safe to just go back home. The next day she woke up and all her chickens were dead, and their eyes were all puffy. And she said, how are we supposed to feel safe staying around here in our houses when all our livestock are dead outside just, from the night before? So like you said, and was it their governor or their mayor who said, yeah, I'm likely to go back home, but I wouldn't drink the water. I'd drink the bottled water. So it doesn't inspire any confidence at all. And was it, Brandon, you said it was vinyl chloride?
It converts to hydrogen chloride when it contacts with water.
Even vinyl chloride itself, exposure to that increases your risk of liver cancer, and we don't know what this is going to do to people 5 years later. Yeah. It could be very latent, manifestations of exposure to it. However, whatever the degree of your exposure is. So there's definitely a lot to consider. Like you said, number one would be water. I mean, people in Flint, Michigan know what it's like to go without water because that's still a problem for them. Mm-hmm. So I think that it would be smart to, what my husband said to me before was, every time I go grocery shopping, I should add an extra can of something. Just every time. It doesn't have to be buy in bulk, but just get an extra can of a few things. And we have jugs of water stocked up in our garage because you never know. Right. And that would be the most precious commodity, is water.
Yeah, we've been doing that here. Brandon and I have been stocking up on things. I think you've done a better job than I have, but that's a really good strategy, because going out and buying everything in one go doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's going to be expensive, right? You're talking about and I read about this when I started doing it. I wanted some advice, and having a year's worth of food and water and potentially electricity too, if you can get on that side of the preparation as well, because it's not just food, it's also power, is pretty smart, because you really don't know how long these kinds of incidents are going to play out. And I think it varies from the type of crises that we're talking about, but anywhere up to a year is a good idea in terms of having some spare resources floating around. The kinds of foods that I've been buying have been non-perishable foods as a result. Kind of rices, pastas, beans, any kind of like stuff that won't go bad within a few months. You can even buy certain
MREs.
sauces and things like that will pretty much last for a couple of years.
Yeah, they have MREs. My dad, when we were kids, he used to stock up on MREs, and it's funny because
Really?
as kids, we thought it was we were like, oh, this is so cool. We should taste these, and we're like, these taste horrible, but they have new ones now. Like My Patriot Supply is one of those companies that do meal replacement kits or meal preparation kits. So those are pretty handy to have. But if they could be a little expensive, they say that each pack is like worth 3 months for each person. So you don't just stock up on 3 months and then that's your whole family. You have to think of 3 months for each member of the family. But if you're like a regular person like me who can't afford an expensive entire kit, that is something handy to think about. Like every time you go grocery shopping, buy a few cans of whatever it is you buy anyway already. But remember to be mindful of the shelf life. So if I'm buying a can today, weeks or maybe like a month or two later, I want to then rotate that and use that and then replace that with something fresher or newer, just to make sure that you're not carrying with your survival kit something that's already expired or close to its date. But
I guess it depends on the situation. Like if you're able to stay home versus you need to bug out, you need to get into the forest and camp and survive, that's a whole different scenario. But if you're at home and if you have a couple $100, you can get these buckets even on Amazon that have like a 25-year guaranteed shelf life, with like 90 servings of food, which is almost 3 months if you ration for one person. So if you have a little cash, that's one way to go. The biggest part about that is the shelf life, because if you get beans, you get rice, you get certain pastas, you have to store them properly. And I've had this issue in the past where I've bought tons and tons of rice, for example, and then they get mites and they get infested, and then you have to clean them out, and then they get reinfested. And if you don't store them properly, then it really degrades how long those last. And then you have to be able to have power to boil and to cook that food. So there's a lot that goes into preparing it, but that's also the cheaper way to do it. Because rice doesn't cost that much. Pasta doesn't cost that much. Beans are very cheap generally. Very good source of protein. Lentils. But yeah, if you have a couple $100, definitely get those buckets, because the shelf life is awesome. You just need water. You add in water and you got a meal, and that could be great in a disaster where you don't have access to anything.
Yeah. Can you see this? So I'm scrolling through the My Patriot Supply website, which Hillary mentioned. And
Brandon, they've got buckets in there.
A lot of, now I don't know what this tastes like, so I'm not going to make any judgments about the, people's palates are different. I personally like tasty food. 25 years is a long time. I mean, are we going to be locked up for 25 years? I'm not sure. But like Brandon, like you said, if you need to get out of your home and you need to take this stuff with you, I think those emergency rations are a much better idea than having a bag full of canned food, because that's going to weigh so much. And obviously you wouldn't want to carry all that stuff with you. So emergency rations are something that I personally need to invest more in. So I'm probably going to be doing that. But yeah, that's fascinating stuff. I mean, there's a whole lot of different types of food that you can buy to prepare for any such event. The life straw is probably one of the best solutions to the drinking issue. So, you know, rather than storing up on a bunch of bottles of water, you might want to do that. But on top of that, if you have one of these, then at least you know you're not going to have to, you know, store unnecessary amounts of water as well. You can just carry one of those around with you. Speaking of these kinds of crises, you know, and also, Hillary, you touched on this earlier. Are you more worried about the kind of impact it's going to have on your body and your health, or are you more worried about, you know, the possible social unrest that would come as a result of something like this happening? And so preparedness also covers protection, self-protection. I don't know what you guys have done to protect yourself. We're all living in, well, I'm living in the same country as Brandon, but you're in the States. We're over here in Colombia. There's a limit on the kinds of things that we can do to protect ourselves here. What about you over there? How have you tackled that?
You know, I'd like to think that I'm tactically prepared as best as I can be, but the dynamics are different when you're a parent, because you've got a child to think about. And so that really changes things, which makes me think of Joel in Last of Us, right? Like, he's fine. He and Tess were fine until they had a teenager to look after. So that definitely changes your frame of mind. For me, it's mostly making sure that, you know, do we stay? Do we shelter in place? So what my husband and I have actually done is we are tactically prepared in terms of having instruments for self-defense and protection. But we have also spoken to friends of ours, and we created a plan where if you know, certain things were to hit the fan, where do we all meet up and where do we go? So we have friends who have property in different states, and we've mapped out a plan. We'll meet here, we'll all convoy, we'll go over there, because we have a friend who's got like a 10-acre piece of property. So, and he's very tactically prepared for things like this. Also, by trade, that's what he used to do for a living. So there's that level of security that we have an expert in our group who would know to lead us. I can't believe we're talking about this. It just kind of brings the reality of it, like, oh my goodness. But yes, so that's what we're doing. And a lot of my friends have thought, you're so silly. Like, why would you think this would happen? I'm like, you never know. And as these recent events have started to unfold, they're like, wow, that is something to think about. So you want to look at states where you're more likely allowed to defend yourself in certain ways, as opposed to certain cities and states where you wouldn't have access to things that could protect you, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think situationally, it depends so much on our own situations. Like you mentioned yours, like I have just a girlfriend and a dog. And that's, you know, a bit different even compared even to Clement too. And, you know, what he's got to look after. My dog eats more than both of us combined every single day. So I have to prepare so my dog has enough food too.
Your dog could just eat people. Like, I mean,
she might
really bad. Just
sick them. Teach your dog to eat bad people.
Dinner, Athena.
I'm trying to teach her how to go fetch potable water, to get food, grab a bag of rice.
That's so smart.
I'm kidding. I wish I could.
I have a husky, a Siberian husky, and they're pretty dramatic dogs. So I don't know what to do about that guy.
That's beautiful.
Very. So that's one thing.
But speaking about the dog, though, like having a dog is a good survival instrument, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, especially if it's not a poodle, especially if it's a decent sized dog that can.
I don't know. Poodles are very protective dogs, and they're very intelligent. Actually, if you have like a full grown poodle, Like not one of those little tiny ones, but like a full grown poodle. That's good defense right there.
Right. Okay, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a dog who's just you know, a protector of the family. Doesn't matter what side. I've seen small dogs actually, now that I think about it, on video, who kind of fought off or at least scared away attackers, whether they're animal attackers or human attackers. So I think a dog in general was a good choice. I think, you guys obviously have that covered. I'm thinking of getting a dog now, trying to figure out what breed it's going to be. But dogs seem to be very, very important when it comes to these kinds of things.
Big dogs are good human deterrents. One of the hardest things to prepare for any kind of disaster. I mean, you can prepare for a pandemic. You can prepare for an earthquake or something that displaces you. You can prepare from unrest, not having access to the grid. But people are very unpredictable, and people, in a very bad situation could do unthinkable things, unpredictable things. And I think having a good human deterrent, like a dog, for example, or a weapon or a firearm, are very important to keep in mind. Yeah, the dog is a bit more expensive, but they're also intelligent. They're very protective, and they're more scary sometimes than even a good gun. They make people think twice. So that's another reason I have one. It helps tremendously if there was a situation that arose where, unfortunately, you'd have to think about that.
And it is sad, right? Because you would like to think that most people at times like that would want to bandy together and just get along and not get into fights or unnecessary trouble. But even though Hollywood is Hollywood and it's all made up, it is a representation of reality to a certain degree. And there are people, unfortunately, who will try to take what you have. And that's one of the major challenges for us. For me, living in an urban area where there is a lot of poverty, they're really on the edge from paycheck to paycheck. So if something like this happens, it doesn't take long for humans to resort to desperation. And desperation brings all kinds of fluctuations with your moral compass, let's say. And I don't want to be on the receiving end of someone who's desperate, trying to stay alive and will do anything to do so. So I have... here in Colombia, it's illegal to own a firearm with live rounds if you're not licensed. And it's hard to get a license, especially as a foreigner. So what I've done is I've kind of gone the level down, and I've gotten a traumatic pistol, which is basically the same thing, but it's just got a rubber bullet cartridge instead. So same gun, just different ammunition. And actually it's probably better because I think the sight of a gun is enough to kind of scare most people away. And I don't know if I really want to be in a situation where I'm using live rounds with people here. I don't know. So that's one step I've taken. For other ways of protecting ourselves physically, there's, obviously the taser. We have a taser. And we have a pepper spray too, which I think is actually probably one of the most effective ways to protect yourself in close quarters, because you don't have to aim particularly well to make it effective. It's very powerful stuff. Tasers, for example, hand tasers, not the pistol tasers. You have to get close, and you're going to get into a struggle with someone, and that's not really the way you want to go. So that's like last line of defense. But the pepper spray, I highly recommend to everyone. I've bought people pepper sprays before. I work with a lot of models here. It's hard for them to travel. Sometimes they feel unsafe. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It's like, I think Smith & Wesson do really good ones, and they cost, pretty cheap. So on that side, that's how I've kind of protected myself.
Yeah.
Ninja throwing stars work great at a distance.
Oh, and I have a samurai sword. Although that wasn't I didn't buy that for self-protection. It's a very cumbersome object.
I want to build on that though. And one thing people need to remember or consider also is that whatever weapons we choose to arm ourselves with, be ready to consider that being used against you as well. So exactly. With the responsibility of any form of weapon or protection, you have to have that knowledge and skill if and when that is used against you as well. Like, I know people would easily want to reach out for a pistol, a gun, whatever, right? They think, oh, a gun is easy. But what if it's taken from you?
Yes.
You know, the reality of being ready when you whip out a knife. What if they take that from you, disarm you, and use it against you? So that's one thing that a lot of people don't even really think about. That, oh, I have a weapon. Okay, well, what if it's used against you? It can also be used against you. So I would say,
Such a
especially
good piece
for
of
women,
advice.
yeah, invest in self-defense, invest in martial arts. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about my growing up, is that my parents invested in all three of me and my siblings in martial arts. And my sister, she would bring me to her knife fighting classes where they teach the basics of close quarter knife combat. And I'm like, wow, this is clever. You know, like how to move in small spaces where, while you're parrying away strokes and like punches at you or a knife being thrown at you, if I were to have a knife in my hand, I would also know how to disarm and how to maim my opponent and then get away. The goal isn't to, like Mortal Kombat says, finish him. The goal is to just maim them enough so you can get out of there. So
if you pulled someone's head off, Hillary, I don't know if I would be terrified or impressed, because
hey, you never know. You know, true colors come out in survival situations.
Yeah, that's actually, the psychology of it's really important too. You know, having that self-defense makes you very calm and collected in those situations where most people would freeze and not know what to do and would panic. You go into fight or flight and you make poor decisions because you're trying to survive. But if someone pulls a gun on you, there's two things at work. There's how you handle that situation and defend yourself and potentially disarm the combatant. And the person holding the gun, you know, unless it's like a trained Navy SEAL or a hunter that has fired 1,000 rounds in his life, most people are nervous even on that side of the gun too. And they're going to be nervous to pull the trigger, and they're going to make mistakes as well. So if you're the more calm and collected one in that situation, you have a better chance at coming out on the positive side of it. So yes, self-defense classes are great. That's something I've wanted to get into for quite a long time as well. It's a good skill to have. And then a good alternative to a gun that is far more reusable is a bow. If you get like a really good high-end hunting bow, you can use them over and over and over again. You don't need constant ammunition that has like, you know, you can use it one time, then you got to find more.
This
you
really
have
does
to
sound like
know,
The Last of Us right now.
It does. And it's also like a Walking Dead thing too, but it's true. Like whether it's a crossbow or like an actual hunting bow, they're not easy for someone else to use as well. So they're less likely to probably steal it off of you immediately. Everyone's going to go for the gun because it's automatic. And it's a great long distance weapon too. So another option.
I think
Hard to hit a moving target though.
It's pretty hard and a long time to reload. This is my gaming kind of experience coming into it now, where I've kind of learned, I've learned about different weapon types and the advantages and the disadvantages of them. But anyway, it would be interesting to see you walking around with a bow strapped to your back, Brandon.
That looks so cool, though. I see Brandon already with his bow and arrow, his quiver of arrows.
And a hood.
Well, I mean, again, it depends on the situation. If I was out in the woods, you know, having any kind of long range weapon, you have to be accurate because anything could come at you from any direction. Whereas if I'm holed up in my apartment on the 25th floor and someone climbs those stairs all the way to try and get to my door, and I have a very narrow passageway that goes to my apartment from the stairs, you know, it's very easy for me to probably hit them with a gun or an arrow. So I think having a little bit of knowledge and skill as well in a very bad scenario like this is also helpful. And that's, I think, something else we take for granted is all the knowledge is out there on the internet that you can just download for free, whether it's how to garden, whether it's how to do self-defense. There's a lot of good videos on it online as well. If you don't have money to go to a class, you can learn basic stuff. Whether it's how to make certain medicines out of household supplies, whether it's how to keep your house clean so you don't get sick. You know, there's lots of information on the internet that you can just download. It doesn't cost you anything. They could save your life in a situation where you don't have access to any resources.
You know,
Yeah,
when I was 12 years old, we had a book that my dad had bought, and it was on toxic plants, like which ones are poisonous and which ones are edible, which ones have medicinal properties. And I remember thinking, like, wow, what an interesting book. But now that you mentioned it, Brandon, it is worth having something like that handy. So if we do have to kind of forage and scavenge out there, you know which ones to stay away from, you know which ones would provide you some moisture if you really can't get any water, you lost your life straw, which ones to use in case of an infection or a wound that you can use as medicine. So, and
I
those
think
are
Bear Grylls did a book about that kind of thing, didn't he?
I had a
show.
book too growing up. It's called A Green Beret's Survival Guide. And it goes through all that stuff, talks about dangerous plants to avoid, which ones you can eat that are common in certain areas, how to trap, how to set up a tent, how to build a fire.
Nice.
Like, worst case situation, you have no resources. How can you make it out there?
Yeah, we should do a part 2 of this.
Yeah, there's so much we would want to cover on this. I think there's just 2 more things I want to touch on just to kind of give this kind of overall view of survivalism. But you know, the other thing people may want to consider, and this isn't always going to be possible because of maybe people's financial or just life situation in general, but having more than one passport is pretty powerful. Even if it's not a passport, if you have like a residency visa or just somewhere else you can go, maybe a different country, some of the kinds of incidents that we're talking about might make more sense to leave the country you're in, especially in a country that's less developed, right? So let's say we're in Colombia. If anything happened here, if there were violent protests, if there was just massive civil unrest, I probably would think about leaving. And if I'm a Colombian citizen, which I'm not, my options would be very limited because of the type of passport that I have. Luckily for us, for people who live in more developed nations, that's not as much of an issue. I think getting these kinds of passports, there's different ways to do it. You can invest, you can study, you can. I'm talking about visas, not passports now, actually. You can, marry, right? If you've got a girlfriend or a boyfriend or from another country, you might want to consider doing that because times do look pretty tough ahead. And having more than one passport, I think, is going to be very handy, especially if you have some money lying around and you can kind of pull together a plane ticket or just get out of the country. So what I'm trying to kind of instill in people's minds is freedom of mobility. Freedom of mobility is super important. It's also one of the fundamentals of being prepared for any kind of crisis, because you could talk about preparing for physical attacks all day. You could talk about making sure you're going to be healthy through these things, but maybe leaving would be so much more effective.
Speaking of leaving, I got a jet. I've got a class to teach, but I definitely think we should do a part 2 of this and really dive into that list. I know, Clement, you shared a list with us, a super handy list of practical tips on what to do to prepare for such an event.
Yeah, I think maybe we've done a good kind of underlying fundamental overview of survivalism. Maybe we can dive into more of the real details and some other scenarios on a part 2. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, let's do a part 2. There's so much more to this that we didn't even cover, and including like electricity as well as, different situations, maybe location as well, where to live. Should you
trading
should you
and
try
bartering.
and be trading, bartering? Should you be rural? Should you be in a city? Disadvantages and advantages of being in certain locations, I think, is important. Yeah, there's a lot of topics, so let's definitely set up another episode.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening this far. If you like our content, please subscribe, hit the like button, share this with your friends and family. Every single thing that we get to support us is really, really appreciated. So we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.